Special Agent Danielle Harper was known for her sharp mind and dedication to justice. She had spent years climbing the ranks of the FBI, earning respect from colleagues and communities alike. Her latest assignment took her to a quiet little town where something sinister was brewing. Hate crimes targeting people of color were on the rise, but local authorities seemed uninterested in investigating them. Danielle's mission was clear: go undercover, gather evidence, and bring those responsible to justice. On a chilly afternoon, Danielle parked her car near a convenience store at the edge of town. The area wasn't busy, just a few shoppers coming and going, but it gave her a perfect vantage point to observe. She sipped coffee from a thermos while jotting down notes about suspicious activity she'd noticed over the past week. Nothing out of the ordinary caught her eye today, but patience was key in cases like this. As Danielle sat there, Officer Karen Whitmore drove by in her patrol car. Karen was a familiar face around town, though not necessarily a beloved one. Known for her short temper and prejudiced views, she often targeted individuals based on their appearance rather than actual wrongdoing. When Karen spotted Danielle's car parked along the curb, her instincts flared. To Karen, Danielle didn't fit into this neighborhood. Her skin tone, casual clothing, and calm demeanor made Karen suspicious immediately. Karen slowed her vehicle and pulled up behind Danielle's car. She stepped out with an air of authority, her hand resting on the holster of her gun as if ready for trouble. Danielle noticed the patrol car in her rearview mirror, but remained calm. She knew better than to react hastily, especially when dealing with officers who might already have preconceived notions about her. "Is there a problem, officer?" Danielle asked politely as Karen approached her window. "You tell me," Karen replied curtly. "What are you doing here?" Danielle explained that she was simply taking a break after running errands nearby. But Karen wasn't satisfied. In her mind, anyone who looked like Danielle didn't belong in this part of town. Without providing a valid reason, Karen demanded to see Danielle's ID. Danielle hesitated, knowing her rights. "I'm not required to show you my ID unless I'm suspected of committing a crime," she said calmly. "Am I under suspicion for something?" Her composed response only irritated Karen further. Instead of backing off, Karen leaned closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't get smart with me," she snapped. "You're loitering, and I want your ID now." Danielle sighed inwardly, realizing this encounter was escalating unnecessarily. Still, she decided to de-escalate the situation. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her FBI badge and held it up for Karen to see. "I'm Special Agent Danielle Harper with the FBI," she said firmly. "This is official business." But Karen scoffed, refusing to believe what was right in front of her. "Nice try," she sneered. "That badge looks fake. You think you can fool me." Danielle tried again, explaining her role and even offering to call her supervisor for verification. But Karen wouldn't listen. Her biases blinded her to the truth, and soon, things would spiral far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Little did Danielle know, this moment would set off a chain of events that would test her resolve and reveal the strength of her character in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Karen's refusal to acknowledge Danielle's credentials only fueled her frustration. The officer crossed her arms, glaring at Danielle through the car window as if daring her to argue further. "I've seen enough fake badges in my time," Karen said coldly. "You're coming with me until we sort this out." Danielle kept her voice steady, though she could feel her heart pounding. She knew that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "Officer Whitmore, I assure you, I am who I say I am," she said firmly. "If you'd like, I can call my supervisor right now to confirm my identity." But Karen wasn't interested in confirmation. Her pride had been wounded, and Danielle's calm demeanor seemed to irritate her even more. "Step out of the vehicle," Karen ordered, raising her voice so passersby could hear. A small crowd began to gather, curious about the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Danielle hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. Arguing further wouldn't help. Karen clearly wasn't going to back down. Reluctantly, she stepped out of her car, hands raised slightly to show she posed no threat. "I'm cooperating fully," Danielle said, addressing both Karen and the growing audience. "There's no need for this level of aggression." Karen ignored her words and immediately reached for her handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," she barked. Danielle complied, knowing resistance would only escalate the situation further. As the cold metal clamped around her wrists, she locked eyes with Karen, silently vowing not to let this injustice go unanswered. By now, 2 more patrol cars had arrived, responding to Karen's earlier call for backup. The officers who joined her quickly sided with her version of events, assuming Danielle must have done something wrong. One of them sneered, "What kind of FBI agent drives around in a beat-up old car like this?" Another muttered under his breath, "Probably just another scam artist." Danielle bit back a retort, choosing instead to focus on observing every detail. She memorized their badge numbers, noted how roughly they handled her belongings during a search of her car, and paid close attention to the dismissive tone they used when speaking to her. Every interaction was evidence she planned to use later. As they led her toward one of the patrol cars, Danielle tried once more to reason with them. "This is unlawful detention," she said calmly but firmly. "You're violating my rights as a federal agent." But her words fell on deaf ears. The officers laughed it off, mocking her attempts to assert herself. "Tell it to the judge," one of them quipped before slamming the door shut behind her. Sitting alone in the back seat of the patrol car, Danielle allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. This wasn't the first time she'd faced prejudice because of her race, but it stung all the same. Still, she refused to let anger consume her. Instead, she focused on what mattered most, ensuring that this incident didn't happen to someone else. She glanced out the window, noticing several people still filming the scene. "Good," she thought. "Let them see exactly what goes on here." Public awareness was a powerful tool, and Danielle knew firsthand how important it was to shine a light on injustice. For now, she would endure this humiliation, trusting that her training and resolve would guide her through the storm ahead. The drive to the police station felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Yet even as uncertainty loomed over her, Danielle remained steadfast. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly simply because of the color of their skin. And she wouldn't stop until justice prevailed. The police station was bustling with activity when Danielle arrived, but her presence quickly became the center of attention. Officers whispered among themselves as she was escorted inside, their eyes filled with skepticism and judgment. Some sneered openly, while others avoided looking at her altogether. It was clear that Officer Karen had already painted her as a troublemaker, someone unworthy of respect or fairness. Danielle was led to a small, dimly lit room where she was told to sit on a hard wooden bench. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paperwork, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Despite the discomfort, Danielle sat upright, her posture calm and composed. She knew that showing any sign of weakness would only embolden those who sought to belittle her. As the booking process began, Danielle once again showed her FBI badge and identification, hoping someone, anyone, would take her seriously. But each time, her credentials were dismissed with a wave of a hand or a dismissive laugh. "Yeah, sure," one officer said sarcastically. "And I'm the president." Another muttered under his breath, "Looks like we've got ourselves an actress today." Each insult stung, but Danielle refused to let them break her spirit. Instead, she used the situation to her advantage. While they snapped her photo for the mugshot and recorded her fingerprints, she observed everything around her. She noted the names of the officers involved, memorized details about the room, and kept track of every procedural violation she noticed. These officers weren't just humiliating her. They were making careless mistakes that could later be used against them. At one point, Danielle requested access to her personal belongings, including her phone. To her surprise, the officers hadn't properly confiscated it during their earlier search of her car. Thinking it was just a regular cell phone, they handed it over without hesitation. Danielle hid her relief, careful not to draw attention to its importance. Using coded language during a brief call to her assistant, she quietly instructed them to activate a contingency plan designed for situations like this. Meanwhile, word of Danielle's arrest reached higher-ups at the FBI. Assistant Director Marcus Reed was livid when he heard what had happened. He immediately called Danielle to assure her that help was on the way. "Stay strong, Agent Harper," he said firmly over the phone. "We're handling this behind the scenes. Don't do anything reckless." Though reassured by her supervisor's words, Danielle couldn't shake the growing sense of injustice around her. As she waited in the holding area, she overheard fragments of conversations between officers. They joked about her arrest, calling her FBI Barbie, and speculating wildly about why she was really in town. One even suggested she was part of some elaborate scam operation. Danielle clenched her fists under the table, but forced herself to stay silent. Every comment, every laugh. It was all fuel for the fire she planned to ignite once she was free. Hours passed, and Danielle remained trapped in the chaotic environment of the station. Yet despite the humiliation and hostility surrounding her, she found strength in knowing she wasn't alone. Her colleagues at the FBI were rallying support, reaching out to legal teams and civil rights organizations. Outside the walls of the station, outrage was beginning to build. News outlets picked up snippets of the story, and social media erupted with posts demanding answers. Hashtags like #JusticeForDanielle started trending, drawing attention to the systemic racism embedded within law enforcement. As night fell, Danielle leaned back against the cold wall, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought about the countless others who had faced similar treatment, people without the resources or platform to fight back. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the truth and holding these officers accountable. No matter what happened next, Danielle vowed to see this through until justice was served. And deep down, she knew she wouldn't have to wait much longer. Change was coming. And when it did, it would shake the very foundations of this town. As the hours dragged on, Danielle's mind raced with strategies. She knew she couldn't rely solely on external forces to resolve this situation. She had to play an active role in turning the tide. While the officers continued to mock her and treat her like a criminal, Danielle focused on gathering evidence that would expose their misconduct. Every careless word they spoke, every procedural misstep they made. It was all ammunition waiting to be used. When Danielle finally got a moment alone after another round of questioning, she discreetly opened her phone under the guise of checking the time. With swift fingers, she typed out a coded message to her assistant. "Activate Phase 2. This simple instruction set off a chain reaction behind the scenes. Her team sprang into action, contacting local news outlets, filing formal complaints with Internal Affairs, and alerting prominent civil rights organizations. They also began compiling documentation of similar incidents involving Officer Karen and her colleagues, building a case that went far beyond Danielle's arrest. Within hours, the story broke online. Social media lit up with posts about the wrongful arrest of a decorated FBI agent. Videos recorded by bystanders at the scene spread like wildfire, showing Karen's aggressive behavior and Danielle's calm professionalism. The hashtags #JusticeForDanielle and #InterRacial profiling trended nationwide, drawing attention not only to Danielle's ordeal, but also to the broader issue of systemic racism within law enforcement. Back at the station, Danielle noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Officers who had previously laughed at her now seemed uneasy, glancing nervously at their phones or whispering urgently to one another. Word had reached them, too. News of the public outcry was spreading fast. For the first time since her arrest, Danielle saw cracks forming in their confident facades. Karen, however, doubled down on her stance. When confronted by her superior about the growing controversy, she insisted she'd done nothing wrong. She lied about being an FBI agent, Karen claimed, her voice trembling with defensiveness. "I was just doing my job." But even she couldn't ignore the weight of the backlash. Reporters were already camped outside the station, demanding statements from the department. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, outraged politicians, and advocacy groups. Meanwhile, Danielle's legal team swung into motion. Armed with video footage, witness testimonies, and Danielle's meticulous notes, they prepared a lawsuit against the police department. The goal wasn't just to hold Officer Karen accountable. It was to dismantle the culture of prejudice and impunity that allowed such abuses to happen in the first place. Civil rights attorneys joined the effort, vowing to push for policy reforms that would protect others from facing similar treatment. As night turned to morning, Danielle remained steadfast. Though exhausted, she refused to give in to despair. Instead, she focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her freedom. It was about exposing the truth and forcing change. Each insult hurled at her, each violation of her rights, it all added fuel to the fire she intended to ignite. By dawn, the pressure on the police department had become unbearable. Protesters gathered outside the station, holding signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and "No Justice, No Peace." Their chants echoed through the halls, shaking the confidence of those inside. Even some of the officers who had initially sided with Karen began to distance themselves, realizing the gravity of what they'd been complicit in. Danielle watched silently as chaos unfolded around her. She knew this was only the beginning. The wheels of justice were turning, and there was no stopping them now. With every passing hour, the walls of denial and discrimination crumbled further. And Danielle, she stood ready, determined to see this fight through until the very end. The pressure on the police department reached a boiling point as protests grew louder and media coverage intensified. Outside the station, crowds swelled with people holding banners that read "Accountability Now" and "Stand with Danielle." Local leaders joined the demonstrators, amplifying calls for justice. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered nervously in corners, avoiding eye contact with one another. Even Officer Karen, who had once strutted through the halls with unchecked authority, now looked uneasy. Faced with mounting scrutiny, the police chief attempted to defuse the situation by offering Danielle a quiet release. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding," he said during a private meeting, his tone laced with insincerity. "You're free to go. Let's put this behind us." But Danielle wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. She leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about me," she said. "What happened here is part of a much bigger problem. If you want to resolve this, there needs to be accountability for everyone involved." Her refusal to leave without answers sent shockwaves through the department. Officers scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, whose actions had become a lightning rod for criticism. Some even began leaking information to reporters, hoping to save face by painting themselves as whistleblowers. The cracks in their unity deepened with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the public outcry showed no signs of slowing down. News outlets aired interviews with residents who shared stories of being targeted by Officer Karen and her colleagues. One woman recounted how she'd been pulled over multiple times while driving through the town, always for minor infractions that somehow only applied to her. A young man described being stopped and searched simply for walking home late at night. These accounts painted a damning picture of systemic bias within the department. Civil rights organizations seized the opportunity to push for broader reforms. Leaders called for independent investigations into the department's practices, mandatory anti-bias training, and increased transparency. Their message resonated far beyond the small town, sparking conversations across the country about racial profiling and police accountability. Social media played a pivotal role, keeping the story alive and ensuring it stayed in the national spotlight. Back inside the station, tensions continued to rise. Officers who had initially mocked Danielle now avoided her altogether, unable to meet her gaze. They knew they were under intense scrutiny, not just from the public, but also from federal investigators who had arrived to look into the incident. The FBI's involvement added another layer of pressure, making it clear that this wasn't something the local department could sweep under the rug. As the days passed, Danielle remained resolute. Though she was eventually released from custody, she refused to step away from the fight. Instead, she worked closely with her legal team to file a lawsuit against the department, naming Officer Karen and several other officers as defendants. Her case gained widespread support, with civil rights groups pledging resources and expertise to ensure it succeeded. Protests outside the station grew larger and more organized, drawing attention not just to Danielle's arrest, but to the systemic issues it represented. Community members took turns speaking at rallies, sharing personal experiences and demanding change. Young activists led marches, chanting slogans that echoed through the streets. Enough is enough, and justice for all. For Danielle, seeing the community rally behind her was both humbling and empowering. She realized that her ordeal had sparked something bigger, a movement fueled by courage and determination. People who had long felt silenced were finding their voices, standing together to demand fairness and equality. By the end of the week, the police department found itself cornered. Public trust had eroded completely, and calls for reform were louder than ever. Officer Karen, once a symbol of unchecked authority, now faced the full weight of the backlash. And Danielle, she stood tall, knowing that her decision to fight back had ignited a wave of change that would ripple far beyond this moment. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Danielle's lawsuit against the police department moved forward. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was a reckoning. Officer Karen, once so confident in her authority, now sat stiffly at the defense table, her face pale and expression uneasy. The weight of public opinion had shifted dramatically, and she was no longer the untouchable figure she'd once been. Every glance from the gallery felt like judgment. Every whispered comment seemed to echo accusations. During depositions, Danielle revealed damning evidence that left no room for denial. She presented recordings, captured during her arrest, of discriminatory remarks made by officers, including Karen. One clip, in particular, sent shockwaves through the room. In it, Karen could be heard mocking Danielle's professionalism and intelligence, suggesting that someone like her didn't deserve respect. The audio played over the speakers, silencing even the most skeptical observers. Danielle also introduced detailed notes she'd taken during her detention, documenting each violation of protocol and every dismissive remark hurled her way. Her observations were meticulous, leaving little doubt about the officers' misconduct. When questioned under oath, some officers stumbled over their answers, contradicting themselves or offering weak excuses. Others refused to testify altogether, citing fear of further backlash. Karen, however, doubled down on her version of events. During her testimony, she insisted she'd acted appropriately, claiming Danielle had provoked her by refusing to comply immediately. "I was doing my job," Karen repeated, though her voice wavered under cross-examination. When confronted with the recording of her own words, she tried to explain them away as taken out of context, but her attempts fell flat. Even some of her colleagues began distancing themselves, unwilling to defend her increasingly indefensible behavior. As the case unfolded, Danielle's team pushed not only for accountability, but also for systemic change. They demanded sweeping reforms within the department, including mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight committees, and stricter consequences for officers who engaged in discriminatory practices. Civil rights attorneys joined the effort, arguing that this case represented a pattern of abuse that needed to be addressed nationwide. Public pressure amplified these demands. Protesters continued to gather outside the courthouse daily, holding signs that read "Justice over bias" and "Reform now." Local activists organized teach-ins and community forums, educating residents about their rights and encouraging them to speak out against injustice. Social media remained ablaze with updates, ensuring the story stayed fresh in people's minds. Inside the courtroom, Danielle remained composed, her presence commanding respect. She knew this fight wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. If she succeeded, it would send a clear message. No one was above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. Her determination inspired others, from fellow agents watching closely to ordinary citizens eager to see justice prevail. By the time closing arguments began, the tide had turned decisively. The evidence was overwhelming, and public sentiment overwhelmingly favored Danielle. Attorney Marcus Reed, representing Danielle, delivered a powerful statement. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's about dismantling a system that allows prejudice to thrive unchecked. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to do better. As the judge adjourned the proceedings to deliberate, Danielle stepped outside to find supporters waiting for her. Cheers erupted as she appeared, lifting her spirits after months of struggle. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself a small smile. No matter the outcome of the trial, she knew she'd already achieved something monumental. She'd sparked a movement. And movements, once ignited, were hard to extinguish. The verdict came on a crisp morning, and the courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters jostled for seats, their cameras ready to capture every reaction. Community members filled the rows behind Danielle, their faces tense with anticipation. Even those who had once doubted her story now leaned forward, eager to hear the outcome. The judge entered the room, his expression unreadable, and called for silence. After a brief pause, he began reading the decision. Officer Karen Whitmore and several other officers were found guilty of misconduct, racial profiling, and violating Danielle's civil rights. The ruling sent a wave of relief through the gallery, followed by murmurs of disbelief from Karen's supporters. For Karen, however, it was a moment of reckoning she couldn't escape. Her career in law enforcement ended that day as she was formally terminated and barred from ever working in policing again. But justice didn't stop there. The court ordered sweeping reforms within the police department, including mandatory anti-bias training, body cameras for all officers, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to review complaints of discrimination. A settlement was reached in Danielle's favor, though she insisted the money be donated to organizations fighting for racial equality and justice reform. "This isn't about me getting paid," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." Public reaction to the verdict was electric. Supporters cheered as Danielle stepped out into the sunlight, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and activists who had rallied behind her cause. Social media erupted with messages of gratitude, many calling her a hero for standing up against injustice. Hashtags like #VictoryForDanielle and #ChanGaiSkoming trended globally, celebrating not just her win but the broader implications of the case. In the weeks that followed, Danielle became a symbol of resilience and courage. Invitations poured in from across the country, asking her to speak at conferences, universities, and community events. At one such gathering, a national summit on policing reform, she delivered a speech that left attendees inspired and moved. "What happened to me wasn't unique," she said, her voice steady yet powerful. "It happens every day to people who don't have a badge or a platform to fight back. My victory is theirs too, and we can't stop until everyone feels safe and respected in their own communities." Her words resonated deeply, sparking renewed efforts to combat systemic racism. In the small town where her arrest had taken place, residents organized grassroots campaigns to hold local leaders accountable. Protesters turned their energy toward constructive action, forming coalitions to push for lasting change. Schools introduced programs teaching students about racial equity, while businesses pledged to adopt fair hiring practices. Officer Karen, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. Stripped of her authority and credibility, she struggled to find work or rebuild her reputation. Her downfall served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that prejudice unchecked could lead to ruin. While some sympathized with her plight, most agreed she had brought it upon herself through years of discriminatory behavior. For Danielle, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a transformative experience. She resumed her duties at the FBI, more determined than ever to root out injustice wherever she found it. Colleagues approached her frequently, seeking advice or simply expressing admiration for her strength. Young agents looked up to her as a mentor, eager to learn how to navigate challenges with grace and determination. Though scars remained from the ordeal, Danielle found solace in knowing her actions had sparked meaningful change, not just for herself, but for countless others who would never have to endure what she did. As she walked through FBI headquarters one evening, greeted by smiles and nods of respect, she reminded herself of something important. True justice wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about creating a world where everyone could thrive without fear of bias or discrimination. And that, she realized, was worth every struggle along the way. Months after the trial, life in the small town began to change in ways no one had anticipated. The police department, once resistant to reform, now embraced new policies aimed at rebuilding trust with the community. Officers attended mandatory anti-bias training sessions, led by experts who challenged their assumptions and encouraged empathy. Body cameras became standard issue, ensuring transparency during interactions with the public. An independent oversight committee was established, composed of local residents, activists, and legal professionals, tasked with reviewing complaints and holding officers accountable. Danielle's case became a turning point not just for that town, but for communities nationwide. News outlets revisited the story, highlighting how one woman's courage had sparked a movement. Documentaries were made, books were written, and Danielle herself became a sought-after speaker. Her speeches inspired audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and take action toward meaningful change. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she often said. It's choosing to stand up even when you're afraid. Back at FBI headquarters, Danielle returned to her duties with renewed purpose. She mentored younger agents, sharing lessons she'd learned from her ordeal. Many looked up to her as a role model, not just for her investigative skills, but for her resilience and integrity. When asked how she remained so composed during such a difficult time, she smiled and replied, "I knew I wasn't fighting alone. Justice is bigger than any one person." The town where it all began transformed as well. Residents came together to create programs fostering dialogue between law enforcement and the community. Monthly meetings gave people a platform to voice concerns and offer solutions. Young activists, inspired by Danielle's bravery, launched initiatives promoting racial equity in schools and workplaces. The hashtag Justice for Danielle evolved into hashtag Justice for All, symbolizing the ongoing fight for fairness and equality. As for Officer Karen, her name faded into obscurity, a stark reminder of what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. Though some tried to defend her actions, most agreed she represented everything wrong with outdated systems of power. Her downfall became a catalyst for others to speak out against similar injustices they'd witnessed or experienced. Danielle occasionally reflected on the journey she'd been through. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of the battle felt almost too heavy to bear. But looking back, she realized every challenge had been worth it. Her arrest, once a source of humiliation, had become a defining moment, not just in her life, but in the lives of countless others. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing case files, Danielle received an email from a young girl named Maya. "Dear Agent Harper," it read, "thank you for showing me that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's hard. Because of you, I know I can make a difference too." Danielle smiled softly, saving the message to a folder labeled Reasons Why. That night, as she drove home under a star-filled sky, Danielle felt a deep sense of peace. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be obstacles to overcome and battles to fight. But she also knew she wasn't alone. A movement had been born, fueled by hope and determination. And as long as people refused to stay silent in the face of injustice, progress would continue. Danielle parked her car outside her house and stepped out, taking a moment to breathe in the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, a reminder of joy, resilience, and possibility. She thought about the future, about all the work yet to be done, and smiled. Change didn't happen overnight, but it started with a single step. And Danielle Harper, she had taken hers, and inspired millions to follow.